The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home, and I knew before I even opened it what it was going to say. Dear Mr. Daniel Crawford, we regret to inform you that due to restructuring and budget constraints, your position as Senior Marketing Director has been eliminated effective immediately. The words blurred together as I read them a second time, then a third, my hands shaking so badly the paper rattled audibly in the silent kitchen. 15 years with the same company, climbing from junior associate to senior director, building campaigns that won awards and generated millions in revenue, and it all ended with a form letter and 2 weeks of severance pay that wouldn't even cover next month's mortgage on the house in the suburbs that we had just bought 8 months ago. I sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, still wearing my suit from the office where I had just cleaned out my desk, while former colleagues avoided making eye contact, and felt the weight of everything crashing down on me at once. I heard the front door open and close, heard my wife Jessica's heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she came in from her own job at the law firm downtown. "Daniel, you're home early," she called out, her voice carrying that perpetual note of impatience that had become more pronounced over the past year as her career had accelerated while mine had started to stagnate. I didn't answer immediately, just held up the termination letter as she walked into the kitchen and watched her face cycle through confusion, then understanding, then something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "They let you go?" she asked, setting her designer handbag down on the counter with more force than necessary. "Today? Just like that?" I nodded, not trusting my voice yet, and saw her face harden in that way I had learned to recognize as her shutting down emotionally, closing off any vulnerability and retreating into the cold analytical mode she used in her legal work. "How much severance?" she asked, and the fact that this was her first real question told me everything I needed to know about where her mind had gone. 2 weeks, I said quietly. "That's it. 2 weeks for 15 years. She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound without any humor in it. 2 weeks? Daniel, our mortgage is $4,200 a month. The car payments are $1,100. We have credit card debt from the renovations that's costing us $800 a month in minimum payments. My student loans are $650. How exactly are we supposed to survive on 2 weeks of severance?" Each number she recited felt like a punch, a reminder of all the financial commitments we had made together when my income had seemed stable and secure, when we had believed that our upward trajectory was inevitable and permanent. "I'll find something else," I said, hearing how weak and unconvincing the words sounded even as I spoke them. "The job market is good right now for marketing professionals. I have experience and connections. I can—" "The job market is not good right now," she interrupted, pulling out her phone and scrolling through something. "I was just reading an article this morning about how marketing departments are the first to get cut in economic downturns because companies view them as non-essential overhead. And you're what, 42 years old? Do you know how hard it is for someone in their 40s to get hired when companies can get someone fresh out of college for half the salary?" The way she said 42 years old made it sound like I was ancient, like I had somehow failed by aging, by not becoming senior enough fast enough to be immune to layoffs. "I have skills and experience that younger candidates don't have," I said, defensive now, feeling the need to justify my own worth to my wife, who was looking at me like I was a bad investment that needed to be liquidated. "I've managed teams. I've built strategies. I've worked with major clients. I have a track record of—" She cut me off again with a wave of her hand. "Daniel, I need you to be realistic right now, not optimistic. We're in serious trouble financially, and I can't carry this entire household on my salary alone." The way she emphasized my salary made it clear that she saw our finances as separated now, that in her mind she was already calculating how to protect herself from my failure. "We'll figure it out together," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand, needing some physical connection to ground me in this nightmare. "We're a team. We've been through tough times before. We can—" But she pulled her hand away before I could touch it, stood up from the table, and looked down at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something cold and evaluating and utterly devoid of the love that had once been there. "I need to think about some things," she said. "I'm going to stay at my sister's place tonight. We can talk more tomorrow when I've had time to process this." She picked up her handbag and walked out of the kitchen without another word, without a hug or a kiss or any gesture of support, and I heard the front door close behind her, with a finality that made my stomach drop even further than it already had. I sat alone in that kitchen for hours, the termination letter still on the table in front of me, watching the light fade outside the windows as evening turned into night. The house felt enormous and empty around me, all the space we had been so excited about when we bought it, now just emphasizing how alone I was in this moment. I thought about calling someone, a friend, my brother, my parents, but the shame of what had happened kept me frozen in that chair, unable to reach out, unable to admit out loud that I had failed, that I had lost the job that was supposed to define my worth and my identity. Around midnight I finally moved, going upstairs to the bedroom that suddenly felt strange and unfamiliar. Without Jessica there, lying on top of the covers in my suit because I didn't have the energy to change, staring at the ceiling and watching the headlights from passing cars create moving shadows across the room. Sleep didn't come until almost dawn, and when it did, it was restless and filled with anxiety dreams about falling and being unable to stop. Jessica didn't come home the next day, or the day after that. She sent a text on the third day. Staying at Rebecca's for a bit longer. Need space to think. We should probably talk about what comes next. I stared at that message for a long time, at the careful distance in the phrasing. The way she said what comes next instead of us or our marriage or anything that acknowledged we were supposed to be partners. I called her, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted back asking when we could talk but got no response. The silence from her was somehow worse than an argument would have been, because at least an argument would have meant she still cared enough to engage, to fight, to try to work through this. Instead, I got nothing, just the absence of her in the house and the growing certainty that something fundamental had broken between us the moment I lost my job, like my employment status was the load-bearing wall of our entire relationship. I spent those first few days in a strange limbo, waking up at my normal time out of habit, showering and getting dressed as if I still had somewhere to go, then sitting at my home office desk and staring at job-posting websites without really processing what I was reading. The positions all blurred together, requirements I met but barely, salaries that were 20–30% less than what I had been making, companies I had never heard of offering roles that sounded suspiciously like downward moves disguised as opportunities. I updated my resume 17 times, each version feeling more desperate than the last, trying to find the magic combination of words that would make me seem valuable instead of expendable. I reached out to former colleagues and industry contacts, carefully worded messages that tried to sound casual while making it clear I was available for opportunities, and got back a handful of sympathetic responses that promised to keep an ear out but offered nothing concrete. The job search felt like shouting into a void, sending application after application into automated systems that probably filtered me out before any human even saw my information. On day 7, Jessica finally agreed to meet me for coffee at a place near her office, neutral territory that made it feel more like a business meeting than a conversation between husband and wife. She looked polished and put together as always, her lawyer uniform of expensive suit and perfect makeup, creating a barrier between us that felt impenetrable. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she started without preamble, not bothering with small talk or asking how I was doing. "And I don't think I can do this anymore, Daniel. I don't think this marriage is working." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though some part of me had been expecting them since the moment she walked out a week ago. "Because I lost my job?" I asked, needing her to say it explicitly, needing to understand if our entire marriage had really been that conditional. "Can we really not get through one setback together, after 8 years?" She sighed, looking at me with something that might have been pity, but felt more like contempt. "It's not just about the job, Daniel. It's about what the job represents. When I married you, you were ambitious and driven and going places. You were someone I could build a future with, someone who matched my own trajectory. But over the past few years, you've just stagnated. You stayed in the same position too long. You stopped pushing for promotions, you got comfortable. And now you've been let go, and honestly, I'm not surprised." Each word was chosen carefully, precisely, the way she probably chose words in her legal briefs, designed to cut deep and leave no room for rebuttal. "I didn't stagnate," I said, hearing the defensiveness in my voice and hating it. I was doing good work. I was valuable to the company. The layoff was about budget, not performance. She cut me off with a raised hand. It doesn't matter, Daniel. What matters is that I can't be married to someone who can't keep up with me. I'm about to make partner at my firm. Do you understand what that means? I'm going to be making close to $300,000 a year. I'll be attending events with clients who are CEOs and executives and power players. And I can't show up to those events with a husband who's unemployed or working some mid-level job at a company nobody's heard of. The nakedness of her ambition and the shallowness of her priorities hit me like ice water, revealing a side of her I had seen glimpses of but never fully acknowledged until this moment. "So this is about image?" I asked, my voice quiet but edged with hurt. "About how I make you look to your colleagues and clients, not about us, not about the life we built together, not about the vows we made." She had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but her resolve didn't waver. "It's about compatibility, Daniel. We're just not compatible anymore. You want to know the truth? I've been unhappy for a while now. The job loss just made it clear that we're heading in different directions." I sat back in my chair, feeling like I was seeing her clearly for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever. "How long have you been unhappy?" I asked. "And more importantly, how long have you been planning to leave?" She looked away, out the coffee shop window at the busy street beyond. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me," I said. "It matters whether you're leaving because of a temporary crisis we could work through together, or whether you've just been waiting for an excuse to justify what you already wanted to do." She was silent for a long moment, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. She had been looking for an exit, had probably been feeling trapped for months or even years, and my layoff had just provided her with a socially acceptable reason to leave that made her look like the practical one rather than the heartless one. "I've already talked to a lawyer," she said finally, confirming my worst fears. "Not from my firm, obviously, but someone I trust. We can do this amicably, split things fairly, make it as painless as possible. I don't want to drag this out or make it ugly." The fact that she had already consulted a lawyer while I was sitting at home thinking we were going to work through this together felt like another betrayal stacked on top of the first. "What about the house?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. "We'll have to sell it," she said matter-of-factly. "Neither of us can afford the mortgage on our own, and with your employment situation, we definitely can't refinance. I've already talked to a realtor friend who thinks we can list it quickly, and hopefully break even after paying off what we owe." She had thought of everything, had planned out the dismantling of our life together with the same efficiency she brought to her legal work, while I had been naively believing that marriage meant something more than a contract that could be terminated when one party stopped performing adequately. "And what am I supposed to do?" I asked, hearing the edge of desperation creeping into my voice. "Where am I supposed to live while I'm trying to find a new job? How am I supposed to rebuild my life when you're taking half of everything we have?" She pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. "I had my lawyer draw up a preliminary separation agreement. It's fair, Daniel. I'm not trying to screw you over. You'll get your half of the house proceeds, half of the savings, half of everything we accumulated during the marriage. Half of everything sounded reasonable in theory, but in practice it meant I would be walking away from my marriage with maybe $40,000 to my name after the house sold and debts were settled, trying to restart my entire life at 42 years old, with no job, no wife, and no clear path forward. "This is really what you want?" I asked one last time, searching her face for any sign of doubt or regret or lingering affection. "You're really going to throw away 8 years of marriage because I lost my job?" She met my eyes directly, and what I saw there was not cruelty exactly, but something almost worse. Indifference, like I was already becoming irrelevant to her, already fading into her past. "I'm doing what's best for me, Daniel. And honestly, this might be what's best for you too. You need to figure out who you are without this job defining you. And maybe you can't do that while trying to maintain a lifestyle and a marriage that was built on assumptions that aren't true anymore." She stood up, gathering her things with the brisk efficiency of someone who had already moved on mentally. "Sign the papers and send them back to the address on the letterhead. We can handle most of this without having to see each other, if that's easier." She walked out of the coffee shop without looking back, her heels clicking authoritatively against the floor, leaving me sitting there with a separation agreement I hadn't known was coming and the shattered pieces of a life I had thought was solid. I sat there for another hour after she left, staring at the papers she had given me, reading through the legal language that reduced our marriage to a division of assets and a timeline for vacating shared property. Other customers came and went around me, living their normal lives, having their normal conversations, completely unaware that the man at the corner table was watching his entire world collapse into rubble. Eventually, the barista came over and gently asked if I needed anything else, and I realized I had been sitting there so long that my untouched coffee had gone completely cold. I gathered up the papers, walked out to my car and sat in the parking garage trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. For the first time in my adult life, I had no job, no marriage, and no clear sense of identity beyond those two things that had just been stripped away. The next 3 months were a blur of humiliation and survival that stripped away every shred of dignity I had left. The house went on the market and sold faster than expected, which Jessica framed as good news, but which just meant I had to pack up my life and find somewhere to live while still unemployed and increasingly desperate. I ended up renting a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood I would have never considered before. The kind of place where the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing at all hours and the parking lot had more broken streetlights than working ones. My half of the house proceeds, after paying off my share of the credit card debt and Jessica's lawyer fees and various other financial obligations I hadn't fully understood we had, came to about $33,000, enough to cover rent and basic expenses for maybe 6 months if I was extremely careful, but nowhere near enough to feel secure. The apartment was furnished with cheap items from discount stores and a few things I had salvaged from the house that Jessica didn't want, and every time I walked in and saw how far I had fallen, I felt a fresh wave of shame wash over me. The job search became increasingly desperate as weeks turned into months and my savings dwindled with terrifying speed. I applied to everything: positions below my experience level, lateral moves to different industries, contract work that paid by the hour with no benefits, even jobs that required relocation to cities I had no desire to live in. I went to networking events where I practiced my elevator pitch about my transition period and exploring new opportunities, watching other attendees' eyes glaze over when they realized I was just another unemployed 40-something trying to seem relevant. I had dozens of phone screenings that went nowhere, a handful of first-round interviews that resulted in polite rejection emails, and exactly 2 second-round interviews that made me hopeful before ultimately ending in silence. The pattern was always the same: initial interest based on my resume, then subtle cooling as interviewers probed why I had been let go, what I had been doing since then, why there was this growing gap in my employment history. Nobody said it directly, but I could feel them thinking it. If you were really as good as your resume suggests, wouldn't someone have hired you by now? By month 4, I was applying to jobs I was overqualified for, just to have any income, any sense of purpose, any reason to get out of bed in the morning. Marketing coordinator positions that paid $45,000 a year, social media manager roles at small companies, freelance consulting gigs that paid a few $100s for projects that would take weeks. I finally got an offer: assistant marketing manager at a mid-sized regional company, reporting to someone 10 years younger than me, making $52,000 a year, which was barely more than half what I had been earning before. It was humiliating and felt like admitting defeat, but my bank account was below $15,000 and rent was due in a week, so I accepted it with as much grace as I could muster and told myself it was temporary, just a stepping stone until I could find something better. My first day at the new job involved sitting through an orientation with 3 recent college graduates, all of us being given the same generic onboarding presentation, all of us equally new and equally disposable in the eyes of the company. The work itself was mind-numbing after years of strategic decision-making and leadership, executing other people's ideas instead of creating my own, being told what to do instead of directing others, attending meetings where my opinions were politely acknowledged and then ignored. My boss, a 32-year-old named Kyle who had impressive credentials and zero emotional intelligence, seemed to delight in reminding me of the hierarchy, assigning me tasks that were clearly below my skill level, and then critiquing my execution in ways that felt personal rather than professional. "I know you're used to doing things a certain way from your previous position," he said during one particularly condescending feedback session, "but we have our own processes here, and I need you to follow them exactly, even if you think your way might be better." The subtext was clear. Your experience means nothing here, your opinions don't matter, you're lucky to have this job at all. I smiled and nodded and said I understood, then went back to my tiny cubicle and felt another piece of myself die. My evenings and weekends became a second job, continuing to search for better opportunities, taking online courses to add new skills to my resume, networking on LinkedIn with a desperation that probably came through in every message I sent. I was living on a razor's edge financially, budgeting down to the dollar, buying generic groceries and skipping any expense that wasn't absolutely necessary. No social life, no entertainment, no small luxuries that might have made the grinding monotony bearable. I thought about Jessica sometimes, wondered if she had made partner yet, imagined her living her best life with someone new and successful who matched her ambitions better than I ever had. Those thoughts were poison, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from checking her social media occasionally, torturing myself with photos of her at firm events, looking happy and powerful and completely fine without me. The contrast between her trajectory and mine was so stark, it felt deliberately cruel, like the universe was rubbing my face in the fact that she had been right to leave, that I really was the anchor holding her back. It was during one of those particularly dark evenings, sitting in my studio apartment eating ramen noodles and scrolling through job postings that all seemed to require skills or experience I didn't quite have, that I hit what felt like absolute rock bottom. My bank account was down to exactly $300, which sounds like a reasonable buffer, until you realize it represents less than 5 months of survival at my current burn rate. And I still hadn't gotten a single interview for anything better than what I currently had. I was 42 years old, living in poverty, working a job that made me feel worthless, and looking at a future that seemed to contain nothing but more of the same downward trajectory. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark of my apartment, listening to my upstairs neighbor's heavy footsteps and a couple arguing somewhere down the hall, and felt the full weight of despair pressing down on me so hard I could barely breathe. For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to cry, not the silent tears of frustration I had shed a few times before, but real, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal, releasing months of accumulated pain and shame and fear. When I finally stopped crying and turned on the light, I noticed something I had been using as a coaster for my water glass, a book I didn't remember buying or bringing to the apartment, probably something that had gotten mixed in with the boxes during the move. Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, the cover showing a muscular black man with an intense stare that seemed to look right through me. I picked it up, more out of curiosity about where it had come from than any real interest in reading, and it fell open to a page that had a corner folded down by whoever had owned it before me. My eyes landed on a passage that had been underlined in pencil. The most important conversations you'll ever have are the ones you'll have with yourself. You wake up with them, you walk around with them, you go to bed with them, and eventually you act on them, whether they be good or bad. We are all our own worst haters and doubters, because self-doubt is a natural reaction to any bold attempt to change your life for the better. I read those words 3 times, each time feeling them hit different parts of my psyche. I had been having the wrong conversation with myself for months, a conversation dominated by Jessica's voice telling me I had stagnated, by Kyle's condescension reminding me I was dispensable, by my own internalized shame telling me I had failed and would continue to fail. But what if that conversation was the problem? What if the story I was telling myself about who I was and what I was capable of was just that? A story, not an immutable truth. I started reading the book properly, not just that one passage, but from the beginning, and got completely absorbed in Goggins's journey from an abused, overweight young man with no prospects to a Navy SEAL and ultra-marathon runner who had systematically demolished every limitation that life and his own mind had tried to place on him. It wasn't the specifics of his story that resonated. I wasn't trying to become a SEAL or run 100-mile races, but the underlying philosophy that you could fundamentally reprogram your own operating system if you were willing to do the hard work. You are in danger of living a life so comfortable and soft that you will die without ever realizing your true potential, another passage read, and that hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been comfortable for years, coasting on past success, doing good enough work to maintain my position but not pushing hard enough to transcend it. And when that comfort was stripped away, I had immediately sought to recreate it, rather than seeing the loss as an opportunity to build something bigger. Jessica had been wrong about many things, but maybe she had been right about one. I had stagnated, not because I lacked capability, but because I had stopped demanding more from myself. That realization was both humbling and galvanizing. I stayed up until 3 in the morning reading that book and filling a notebook with thoughts, questions, and observations about my own patterns and limitations. By the time I finally went to bed, something had shifted in me. Not hope exactly, not yet, but something more like defiant curiosity. What if this wasn't the end of my story, but the beginning of a different one? What if losing everything was exactly what I needed to build something extraordinary instead of just comfortable? What if I stopped trying to get back to where I was and instead aimed for somewhere I had never had the courage to go? The next morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. for the first time since losing my job, not because I had to, but because I chose to. I went for a run even though I hadn't exercised regularly in years, forcing my out-of-shape body through 3 painful miles that left me gasping and reminded me how far I had let myself decline physically along with professionally. I showered, made a real breakfast instead of grabbing something quick, and sat down with my notebook before work to write out something I had never properly articulated before. What did I actually want? Not what did I want to get back to, but what did I want to build if I truly had no limitations? The answer came surprisingly quickly, once I gave myself permission to dream big. I wanted to build my own business, something that was mine, something where my value wasn't determined by whether a corporation decided to keep me on the payroll. I had spent 15 years helping other companies market their products and services, building their brands and generating their revenue. What if I took that expertise and used it to build something for myself, instead of being someone else's disposable employee? The idea felt simultaneously exciting and terrifying because starting a business required resources I didn't have and risked the little financial security I had managed to cling to. But as I sat with the concept over the following days, it started to crystallize into something more concrete. I had deep expertise in marketing strategy, particularly in helping mid-sized companies scale their customer acquisition. I had relationships with business owners I had worked with over the years who trusted my judgment. I had time, evenings and weekends that I was currently wasting on despair and job applications that went nowhere. What if I started a marketing consulting practice, positioning myself not as a desperate employee, but as a strategic advisor who could deliver results without the overhead of a full-time hire? It would mean working twice as hard as I already was, grinding at my day job to pay the bills while building something on the side. But it was the first thing in months that felt like moving forward rather than just treading water. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became that this was what I should have been doing all along, instead of seeking safety in corporate employment. I spent the next 2 weeks building the foundation while still showing up to my soul-crushing job and pretending to care about Kyle's micromanagement. I created a simple but professional website, showcasing my experience and approach, carefully crafted to position me as a senior strategist rather than a desperate freelancer. I reached out to former clients and colleagues with a carefully worded message. I had decided to transition from corporate roles to independent consulting, and if they ever needed strategic marketing support on a project basis, I would be honored to work with them. The responses were mixed. Some ignored me completely, others sent polite good luck messages with no substance, but a handful responded with genuine interest. One former client, the owner of a growing software company I had helped with a product launch 3 years ago, actually called me directly. "Daniel, I've been thinking about hiring a marketing director, but honestly can't justify the full-time cost yet. Could you do like 20 hours a month of strategic work? Help us figure out our customer acquisition strategy and manage the execution through my existing team." 20 hours a month at $150 per hour would be $3,000, I calculated quickly. Not enough to quit my day job, but enough to prove the model could work. I said yes immediately, negotiated a 3-month initial contract with possibility of extension, and hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in 8 months, genuine excitement about my work. That first consulting client led to a second through referral, then a third. I was working insane hours, 8 to 6 at my day job, then 6 to midnight most nights on consulting work, plus full weekends. But for the first time since getting laid off, I felt like I was building something rather than slowly drowning. My consulting clients actually listened to my advice, implemented my strategies, and saw real results that made them want to continue working with me. The work was challenging in ways my day job hadn't been in years, forcing me to stay sharp and creative and constantly prove my value through tangible outcomes. 3 months after starting the consulting practice, I was making about $6,000 per month on the side, more than my day job salary after taxes. 6 months in, I had 7 active clients generating $11,000 per month, and my calendar was so packed I was having to turn down new opportunities because I literally didn't have time to take them on while maintaining the day job. The breaking point came during a particularly absurd meeting at my day job, where Kyle spent 45 minutes critiquing a social media post I had written, suggesting changes that made it objectively worse, but that matched his vision better, while I smiled and nodded and pretended his opinion mattered. I went back to my cubicle after that meeting, looked at my bank account, which now showed $32,000, thanks to the consulting income and aggressive saving, looked at my calendar showing consulting projects that paid more and meant more than anything I did at this job, and made a decision that would have terrified me a year ago, but now felt obvious. I was going to quit, not in some dramatic scene where I told Kyle what I really thought of his management style, but with a simple 2-week notice that positioned it as a strategic career move rather than an emotional reaction. "I've decided to focus full-time on my consulting practice," I told him in our private meeting, watching his face cycle through surprise and something that might have been grudging respect. "I appreciate the opportunity to work here, but I've built something on the side that has more growth potential." He tried to talk me out of it, probably more because finding a replacement would be annoying than because he valued me specifically. But I was done being talked out of what I wanted for my life. My last day at that job felt like being released from prison. I walked out of that building at 5 p.m. on a Friday, got in my car, and sat there for a moment just processing the magnitude of what I had done. I had quit a safe job with steady income to bet everything on myself and a consulting practice that might not sustain, that might collapse in 3 months, leaving me worse off than before. But as I drove back to my tiny studio apartment, I didn't feel afraid. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt since before the layoff, maybe in a way I had never really felt during all those years of corporate employment, where my value was determined by someone else's assessment. The apartment didn't look quite as depressing that night. It looked like a temporary base of operations for someone building something real, not a symbol of failure, but a reminder of how far I had already come and how much further I intended to go. I ordered takeout for the first time in months, not because I could really afford it, but because the occasion demanded celebration, and spent the evening planning my first week as a full-time business owner with the kind of focus and energy I had forgotten I was capable of. Going full-time with the consulting practice changed everything about how I operated. Without the drain of a day job, I could take on more clients, deliver better work, and actually build systems that would allow the business to scale beyond just my personal hours. I hired a virtual assistant in the Philippines to handle scheduling and administrative tasks, invested in proper project management software, and created standardized processes for client onboarding and reporting. Within 2 months of going independent, I had increased my client roster to 12 active retainers, generating $18,000 per month, and I was starting to get referrals from satisfied clients without even having to ask. The work was still intense, but it was intense in a way that felt purposeful rather than draining. Every hour I worked was building equity in something I owned rather than making someone else wealthy. I moved out of the studio apartment and into a decent 1-bedroom in a better neighborhood. Nothing fancy but clean and safe, with actual separation between living and working space. These small upgrades felt like massive victories, tangible proof that I was climbing out of the hole rather than digging deeper. The business continued to grow through a combination of good work and strategic positioning. I started writing articles about marketing strategy and posting them on LinkedIn, which generated inbound inquiries from business owners who resonated with my approach. I spoke on a panel at a small business conference, which led to 3 new clients. I developed a specialty in helping established companies modernize their marketing approach, particularly businesses that had been successful using traditional methods but needed to adapt to digital channels, a niche that played to my experience, while avoiding direct competition with younger, cheaper consultants. By the end of year 1 of full-time consulting, I was generating $28,000 per month in revenue, with about 65% profit margins after expenses, which meant I was taking home more than I had ever made as an employee. But more than the money, what felt transformative was the respect I was getting from clients who sought my advice, implemented my strategies, and saw their businesses grow as a result. I was valuable again, but this time the value was undeniable because it was measured in results rather than corporate politics. Year 2 was when things started to really accelerate. One of my long-term clients, a manufacturing company I had been working with since the early consulting days, offered me an equity stake in their business if I would come on as their fractional CMO and help them scale from $8 million to $20 million in revenue. It was the first time anyone had offered me ownership in something they were building, recognition that my contribution was worth more than just billable hours. I took the deal and threw myself into their growth with an intensity that surprised even me, implementing systems and strategies that increased their lead generation by 180% and their conversion rates by 40% over 18 months. When they hit their growth target ahead of schedule, my equity stake was suddenly worth $200,000 on paper, and the success story became a powerful case study that attracted even bigger clients. I raised my rates from $150 per hour to $250, then to $350, then eventually moved to value-based pricing where I charged based on outcomes rather than time. The business evolved from Daniel Crawford Consulting to Crawford Strategy Group, as I hired my first 2 employees, a junior strategist and a full-time account manager, to help handle the growing workload. By year 3, the business had 15 employees, an impressive roster of mid-market clients, and was generating $3.2 million in annual revenue, with me taking home about $800,000 personally after all expenses and payroll. I bought a house, not as big or fancy as the one Jessica and I had owned, but nice, modern, in a good neighborhood, and completely mine without any mortgage because I paid cash. I bought a car that wasn't extravagant, but was reliable and nice enough that I didn't feel embarrassed pulling up to client meetings. I started investing seriously, working with a financial advisor to build real wealth for the first time in my life. But beyond the financial metrics, what felt most significant was the transformation in how I saw myself and how others saw me. I wasn't Daniel Crawford who got laid off and whose wife left him. I was Daniel Crawford who built a successful strategic marketing firm, who was sought after for his expertise, who had created jobs and helped businesses grow. The narrative had completely flipped, and this time it was a narrative I controlled rather than one that had been imposed on me by circumstances or by other people's limited vision of my potential. The success attracted attention in ways I hadn't anticipated. I got invited to speak at larger conferences, got featured in business publications writing about the consulting industry, got approached by a book publisher asking if I would write about building a services business. The Crawford Strategy Group became known in certain circles as the place mid-market companies went when they needed serious marketing strategy without the overhead of a full-time executive. I developed a reputation for being direct and results-focused, for calling out bullshit and pushing clients to make hard changes, rather than just telling them what they wanted to hear. That reputation was valuable. It meant the clients who came to me were serious about growth and willing to invest in what actually worked, rather than looking for cheap, quick fixes. It also meant I could be selective about who I worked with, turning down projects that didn't align with my values or that came from people I didn't respect. For the first time in my professional life, I had real agency over my work, over my time, over my future. And that agency was worth more than any salary could ever have been. By year 4, Crawford Strategy Group had grown beyond anything I had imagined when I started this journey. We had 28 employees across 3 offices, had worked with over 150 companies, and were on track to hit $5.8 million in revenue. I had built a leadership team that could run day-to-day operations without requiring my constant involvement, which freed me up to focus on high-level strategy, business development, and the occasional speaking engagement that kept our brand visible in the market. The business had become a real company, with systems and processes and a culture that attracted talented people who wanted to work there. I was no longer just a consultant who happened to have employees. I was a CEO running a legitimate mid-market firm that was growing fast and earning respect in the industry. The recognition came in various forms: invitations to join exclusive CEO peer groups, awards from business publications, speaking slots at major conferences where I was introduced with credentials that would have seemed like fantasy 5 years earlier when I was eating ramen in that studio apartment. It was during this period that I got the call that would change everything in an unexpected way. "Mr. Crawford, this is Melissa Zhang from Forbes magazine. We're working on our annual feature about entrepreneurs who've built remarkable companies in unconventional ways, and your story keeps coming up in our research. Would you be interested in being interviewed for potential inclusion in the feature?" I almost thought it was spam at first, one of those too good to be true offers that turn out to be marketing schemes. But I looked up the number, verified it was actually from Forbes' editorial office, called back and confirmed that yes, this was real. They wanted to profile Crawford Strategy Group as an example of how established professionals were leaving corporate careers to build 7-figure consulting practices. The interview process was extensive: multiple phone calls, video interviews, requests for financial documentation to verify the growth numbers I was citing, reference calls to clients and employees. It felt invasive and exhausting, but also validating in a way I hadn't expected. Forbes was essentially conducting due diligence on my entire life to determine if my success story was real enough to feature. 6 weeks after the initial contact, they confirmed I was going to be in the feature, and not just mentioned in passing, but given a full profile with professional photos and a detailed write-up. They scheduled a photo shoot at our main office, sent a professional photographer who spent 3 hours getting shots of me in various poses and settings, and then sent me the cover image for approval: me in a sharp suit, arms crossed, confident expression, with the Crawford Strategy Group logo visible in the background, and a headline that read, "The Reinvention Issue: How These 10 Entrepreneurs Turned Career Crisis into $1 million Success." Seeing that image, seeing my face and my company name on what would be the cover of Forbes magazine, triggered a complex wave of emotions I wasn't fully prepared for. Pride, obviously, and vindication for all the hard work and risk and grinding through the dark periods. But also something deeper, a sense of having transcended not just the circumstances that had broken me 5 years ago, but having transcended the entire mindset that had made me vulnerable to those circumstances in the first place. I wasn't the same person anymore, and this cover was proof of that transformation. The magazine hit newsstands and went live online on a Monday morning in October. My phone started blowing up immediately. Texts and calls from employees, clients, former colleagues, people I hadn't heard from in years, all congratulating me and saying they had seen the Forbes feature. The article itself was well written and accurate, chronicling my journey from the layoff through the divorce, through the desperate job search and the decision to start consulting, then the methodical building of what had become a multi-million-dollar firm. They had interviewed several of my clients who gave glowing testimonials about the value Crawford Strategy Group had delivered. They had verified the revenue numbers and growth metrics. They had positioned me as an example of resilience and strategic thinking, someone who had turned professional devastation into an opportunity to build something more valuable than what he had lost. The online version got thousands of shares on LinkedIn, generated hundreds of comments from people sharing their own career crisis stories, and drove so many inquiries to our website that we had to add temporary server capacity to handle the traffic. Within a week, we had more qualified leads than we could possibly take on, and I was fielding interview requests from other business publications wanting to tell their own version of the story. But the most unexpected impact came 3 days after the Forbes issue published, when I got a text from a number I didn't have saved but that I recognized instantly from the area code and pattern. Jessica. Saw your Forbes cover. Congratulations on your success. I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling a complex mix of emotions that I couldn't easily untangle. There was satisfaction, definitely. The undeniable proof that she had been wrong about me, that I hadn't stagnated or failed, that I had built something extraordinary after she left. But there was also a kind of emptiness to the moment, because I realized I didn't care about her validation anymore the way I might have even 2 years ago. Her opinion had stopped mattering somewhere along the journey, replaced by the opinions of people who actually knew the current version of me rather than the broken version she had walked away from. I typed and deleted several responses before finally settling on something simple and true. Thank you, I hope you're doing well. And then I put my phone down and got back to work, because there were clients who needed my attention, and a team depending on my leadership, and a business that required tending, regardless of who from my past was or wasn't impressed by my success. Jessica's response came about an hour later, longer and more revealing than I expected. I've actually been following your progress for a while now. Saw the articles about Crawford's strategy group last year, heard about you from people in my network. I know this might be awkward, but I'd really like to meet up if you have time. There are some things I'd like to say to you in person. I read that message several times, trying to decode what she was really asking for. Was this just curiosity about my success? Genuine remorse about how things ended? Some angle I couldn't see yet? The cautious part of me that had been burned by her wanted to ignore the message, to leave that chapter of my life permanently closed. But another part, the part that had spent 5 years working on becoming a better, stronger version of myself, was curious about what she wanted to say, and confident enough in who I had become that I didn't fear being pulled back into old dynamics. I'm pretty busy with the business, but I could do coffee next Tuesday at 3 p.m. if that works, I replied, keeping it neutral and time-limited. She agreed immediately, suggesting the same midtown coffee shop where she had handed me divorce papers 5 years earlier. The symmetry was either deliberate or cosmic, but either way, I found it fitting. Tuesday arrived and I showed up exactly on time, wearing a custom-tailored suit that fit perfectly and cost more than I used to spend on clothes in an entire year, driving the Mercedes I had bought 6 months earlier, not for flash, but because I had earned it and it felt good to have nice things that represented my success. Jessica was already there when I walked in, and I was struck by how different she looked. Not older exactly, but harder somehow, like the sharp ambition that had always defined her had calcified into something brittle. She was still beautiful, still polished in that lawyer way, but there was a tension in her face that hadn't been there before. Lines around her mouth that suggested smiling had become more effortful. "Daniel," she said, standing up when she saw me, and there was something in her expression I couldn't quite read. "You look really good. Success clearly agrees with you." I shook her hand, keeping it professional rather than going for a hug, and sat down across from her at the small table. "Thank you," I said simply. "You look well too. How's the firm?" I already knew the answer from mutual connections, but I was curious how she would frame it. "I made partner 2 years ago," she said, and there was pride in her voice, but also something that sounded like exhaustion. "It's been good, busy, demanding. The work is challenging and the compensation is obviously excellent, but it's also a lot. 70-hour weeks are normal. 80-hour weeks aren't uncommon during big cases. My entire life is basically work and trying to maintain appearances at firm events and client dinners." She paused, looking down at her coffee cup. "I'm not complaining, obviously. This is what I wanted, what I worked for. But seeing your Forbes feature, seeing what you built, it made me think about different kinds of success and what they actually cost." I waited, sensing there was more coming, that this wasn't just a casual update about her career. "I need to apologize to you, Daniel," she said finally, looking up to meet my eyes, "for how I handled the divorce, for the things I said about you, for abandoning you when you were at your lowest point. I convinced myself at the time that I was being practical and protecting my future, but looking back, I was just being cruel and selfish and short-sighted." The apology hung in the air between us, and I took a moment to really consider how it made me feel. There was validation in hearing her admit she had been wrong, certainly. But there was also a surprising absence of the anger or bitterness I might have expected. "I appreciate you saying that," I responded carefully. "It was a really dark time, and the way you left definitely made it harder. But honestly, Jessica, I'm not sure I would be where I am now if you hadn't left. The pain and the desperation and the complete destruction of my comfortable life forced me to rebuild from scratch, and in rebuilding, I built something better than what I had before. So in a weird way, I should probably thank you for leaving, because it pushed me to become someone I wouldn't have become if we had stayed together." She flinched slightly at that, and I realized my words had landed harder than I intended. "I didn't mean that to be cruel," I added. "I'm just being honest about how I've processed what happened. The divorce was devastating at the time, but it was also liberating in ways I couldn't see until later." "I know," she said quietly. "I can see that in your success, in how you carry yourself now. You seem more confident, more centered, more yourself than you did when we were married." She took a breath, seeming to gather courage for whatever she was about to say next. "I need to be honest about why I really wanted to meet with you. It's not just to apologize, though I did need to do that. It's also to tell you that I made a mistake leaving you, and to ask if there's any possibility, any chance at all, that we could try again." The question landed like a bomb, completely unexpected despite the apology that had preceded it. "You want to get back together?" I asked, needing to hear her confirm it explicitly. After 5 years, after building completely separate lives, after everything that was said and done. She nodded, leaning forward with an intensity I recognized from when she was making closing arguments. "I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. We had a good thing before everything fell apart. We understood each other, we wanted similar things. We built a life together. Yes, I panicked when you lost your job and I handled it terribly. But that was 5 years ago. You're successful now, I'm successful now. We're both in completely different places. We could build something even better than what we had before, something where we're both at our peak, rather than one of us feeling like we're carrying the other." I sat back in my chair, processing what she had just proposed, examining my own reaction to it with the kind of analytical distance that came from years of self-work and therapy, and learning to understand my own patterns. There was a part of me, a small wounded part that still remembered loving her, that felt a flutter of something at the idea of reconciliation, of proving that we could make it work, now that circumstances were different. But that flutter lasted only a moment, before being replaced by something much clearer. Certainty that going backward was not an option, that the person I had become didn't fit with the person she was, or the relationship we had shared. "Jessica," I said gently but firmly, "I appreciate your honesty and I'm genuinely glad you're doing well in your career. But no, there's no possibility of us getting back together. And it's not because I'm angry or bitter or holding a grudge. It's because we're fundamentally incompatible in ways that success or money can't fix." I could see her preparing to argue, to make her case, so I continued before she could interrupt. "When you left me, you told me it was because I couldn't keep up with you, because you needed a partner who matched your trajectory. And you were right about one thing. We did need different things. But what you didn't understand then, and what I'm not sure you understand now, is that I wasn't failing. I was just trapped in a paradigm that wasn't right for me. The layoff didn't reveal my weakness. It revealed that I had been playing the wrong game entirely. The person I am now, the business I built, the life I have, none of that would exist if we had stayed together. Not because you actively prevented my growth, but because the version of success we were chasing together was your version, not mine. You wanted the corporate climb, the prestige of titles and salary brackets, the social validation that comes from conventional achievement. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what drives me anymore." I paused, making sure she was really hearing what I was saying. "What drives me now is building something that's mine, working with people I respect on problems that matter, having autonomy over my time and my choices, creating value that's measured by results rather than politics. That's a completely different paradigm than what you value, and pretending we could bridge that gap just because we're both financially successful now would be dishonest." She looked down at her hands and I could see her processing the rejection, trying to find an angle to argue from. "But we've both changed, both grown," she tried. "Couldn't we at least explore whether we might be compatible now in ways we weren't before?" I shook my head, not unkindly but decisively. Jessica, let me ask you something honestly. Would you be here right now wanting to explore compatibility if I hadn't been on the cover of Forbes? If I was still working that assistant manager job making $52,000 a year, would you have any interest in reconnecting? The silence that followed was answer enough. That's what I thought, I said quietly. And I don't even blame you for that. It's consistent with your values, with what you've always been transparent about wanting. But it proves my point. You're interested in me now because my success validates your choice to reconnect, not because you actually love who I am or share my vision for what a good life looks like. You want a successful partner who looks good at your firm events and matches your income bracket. And I happen to fit that profile now. But that's not love, Jessica. That's networking. She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again, unable to formulate a counter-argument that wouldn't prove my point. I'm not trying to be harsh, I continued. I'm just being clear about reality. We had our time together, it ended badly, and we've both moved on to build lives that suit us better as individuals than we ever would have as a couple. I wish you genuine happiness and continued success in your career. But we're not getting back together. Not now. Not ever. That door is closed. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over, and she stood too, looking smaller somehow than when I had arrived. I hope you find what you're actually looking for, which I suspect isn't really me at all, but rather the idea of having a partner who reflects well on you. You deserve that if it's what you want. But I deserve someone who wanted me when I had nothing, or at least someone who wants me now for who I am, rather than what I've accomplished. I left cash on the table to cover both our coffees, shook her hand one final time with genuine goodwill, but no regret, and walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years. As I drove back to my office, I reflected on how different this encounter had been from what my wounded self of 5 years ago would have fantasized about. That version of me had imagined a reunion where I got to gloat, where I made her feel as small as she had made me feel, where I rejected her with cruelty to match what I had received. But the actual reunion had been none of those things. It had been honest, direct, and surprisingly free of malice on either side. I didn't hate Jessica anymore, didn't need her to suffer, didn't require her validation or regret to feel good about my own journey. She had been a catalyst in my life, an unwitting one and a painful one, but ultimately a necessary one. Her leaving had destroyed the comfortable but limited life I had been living and forced me to build something truer and bigger. For that, I was genuinely grateful, even if I would never choose to have her in my life again. The person I had become had no space for the kind of conditional love she offered, and that was okay. Actually, it was better than okay. It was exactly right. The weeks following that coffee shop meeting brought an interesting shift in my perspective on the entire journey. I had been so focused on building the business, on achieving success, on proving wrong everyone who had doubted me, that I hadn't fully appreciated what I had actually accomplished beyond the metrics. Yes, Crawford Strategy Group was financially successful and growing fast. Yes, I had rebuilt my life from absolute devastation. Yes, I was on the cover of Forbes, which was objectively cool. But the real victory wasn't any of those external markers. It was the internal transformation that had made them possible. I had gone from someone who derived his entire identity and sense of worth from external validation, job titles, marriage status, salary brackets, to someone who understood that real security comes from within, from capabilities and mindset rather than circumstances. That shift was the actual achievement, and everything else was just evidence of that shift. Jessica's reappearance and subsequent rejection had crystallized something important. I didn't need anyone from my past to validate my present. Didn't need to prove anything to anyone except myself. Didn't need revenge or vindication because the life I had built was its own reward. That realization was more liberating than any business success could ever be. The business continued to evolve in unexpected directions over the following year. What had started as a consulting practice focused on marketing strategy began expanding into broader business transformation work as clients realized that marketing challenges were often symptoms of deeper organizational issues that needed addressing. We started taking on projects around business model innovation, digital transformation, customer experience redesign, higher value, higher impact work that required more sophisticated expertise, but that also commanded premium pricing and attracted more interesting clients. I hired specialists in areas I didn't personally master, built out practice groups focused on specific industries, and transformed Crawford's strategy group from a marketing consultancy into a full-service strategic advisory firm. By year 5 post-divorce, we had crossed $9 million in annual revenue with 45 employees and had worked with some of the most respected mid-market companies in the Southeast. But more than the growth metrics, what felt significant was the quality of the work and the respect we had earned in the market as serious operators who delivered real value rather than just expensive advice. The personal side of my life had evolved too, though more quietly than the business success. I had dated occasionally over the years, nothing serious, mostly just reminding myself that I was still capable of connection and that not every relationship would end in betrayal and abandonment. Then, about 18 months after the Forbes cover, I met someone at a client event who changed my entire understanding of what partnership could look like. Her name was Alicia. She was a technology executive at one of our client companies, and what struck me immediately was not just that she was beautiful and intelligent, though she was both, but that she had her own complete, successful, interesting life that didn't need me to complete it. She had built a career in software engineering, risen to VP of product, was respected in her field, and had zero interest in being saved or fixed or elevated by a relationship. We started as friends, having long conversations about business and technology and philosophy, and the romantic relationship that eventually developed felt like the natural evolution of genuine mutual respect rather than need or desperation masquerading as love. Dating her was completely different from my marriage to Jessica because there was no competition, no scorekeeping, no conditional affection based on professional success. Alicia wanted me because she liked who I was, enjoyed my company, respected my values, and found me attractive. Full stop. And I felt the same about her. It was uncomplicated in the best possible way. What made the relationship work, I think, was that we had both done the hard work of becoming complete individuals before trying to be partners. Neither of us was looking for someone to fix our life or provide identity or validate our worth. We both had successful careers we were passionate about, financial independence, clear senses of self. The relationship was an addition to already full lives rather than an attempt to fill empty ones. We moved in together after about a year of dating, not because we needed to for financial reasons, but because we genuinely wanted more time together. There were no power dynamics or resentments about who made more money or whose career took priority. We just figured it out as partners, making decisions based on what made sense rather than what proved something about status. It was healthy and mature, and honestly kind of boring in the best possible way, like the opposite of the dramatic dysfunction that had defined my marriage. Alicia met my team at Crawford Strategy Group and fit in naturally, understanding the business without needing to be involved in it, supporting my work without defining herself by it. I met her colleagues in tech and did the same. We were together but separate, connected but independent, exactly what a relationship between two whole people should be. The business success continued to generate opportunities I hadn't anticipated. I got approached by a private equity firm about potentially selling Crawford Strategy Group, which opened my eyes to the possibility that the company I had built as a survival mechanism had actual enterprise value beyond just generating income. The initial offer was $8, $5 million for 70% of the company, which would have given me about $6 million in cash while maintaining minority ownership and staying on as CEO. I spent weeks wrestling with that decision, running models with my financial advisor, talking it through with Alicia and my leadership team. The financial security was tempting. $6 million would mean I was set for life, could never worry about money again, could take risks or retire early or do whatever I wanted. But something about giving up control of the thing I had built from nothing, of answering to investors who cared more about financial returns than about the quality of work or the team culture, felt wrong. I ultimately turned down the offer, which shocked the PE firm who had apparently assumed anyone would take that kind of money. I appreciate the offer, I told them in our final call, but I didn't build this company to sell it. I built it because I love the work, and I value the autonomy. Taking your money would just be trading one set of bosses for another, and I already learned that I don't do well answering to people who don't share my values. That decision to turn down the acquisition offer clarified something important. I had genuinely transcended the scarcity mindset that had defined my entire adult life until the layoff. The old version of me would have taken the money immediately, would have seen it as security and validation and proof that I had made it. But the person I had become understood that real wealth was autonomy, that having control over my time and my work and my choices was worth more than any amount of money that came with strings attached. I didn't need to be set for life financially because I had skills and systems that could generate income indefinitely. I didn't need external validation of the company's worth because I knew the value we created for clients and the quality of the culture we had built. The decision to stay independent felt risky in some ways. I was leaving millions of dollars on the table, but it felt aligned with who I had become, and that alignment was its own form of wealth. Crawford's strategy group continued to grow without PE backing, hitting $12 million in revenue by year 6, and I continued to love the work and the team and the freedom to run the business according to my own values rather than someone else's financial models. That felt like success in its truest form, not the number in the bank account, but the freedom to choose what mattered. The Forbes feature continued to generate opportunities long after the initial publication, one of which completely changed the trajectory of both my business and my public profile. A literary agent reached out about 6 months after the article, asking if I had ever considered writing a book about my journey and the lessons I had learned about building a consulting practice from scratch. My first instinct was to dismiss the idea. I was a strategist, not a writer, and the thought of dedicating months to writing a book while running a fast-growing business seemed impractical. But the agent was persistent and persuasive, arguing that my story had elements that would resonate broadly. The career crisis, the devastating divorce, the rock-bottom moment, the systematic rebuilding, the ultimate success. People don't just want tactics about consulting, she explained. They want hope that they can come back from devastating setbacks. Your story provides both the inspiration and the practical roadmap. After several conversations and reviewing proposals from publishers who were interested, I agreed to write the book, carving out early morning hours before work to write and dedicating most of 2 weekends per month to the project. The discipline required was intense, but it was also cathartic in unexpected ways, forcing me to process and articulate lessons that I had absorbed intuitively but never formally codified. The book, titled Rebuild: How to Turn Career Devastation into Your Greatest Opportunity, took 14 months to write and another 6 months to publish. It combined memoir with practical advice, telling my story while also providing frameworks for how others could navigate similar career crises and build their own consulting or freelance practices. The publisher initially printed 15,000 copies, modest expectations for a business book by a first-time author who wasn't already famous. But something about the timing and the message resonated more broadly than anyone anticipated. The book launched to strong initial sales, got featured in several major business publications, and then caught fire on social media as people started sharing quotes and passages that connected with their own experiences of career setbacks and reinvention. Within 3 months, it had sold over 50,000 copies and hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. Within 6 months, it had crossed 120,000 copies and was being translated into 8 languages. The success was surreal and humbling, seeing my story and lessons reaching people all over the world who were struggling with their own versions of the crisis I had survived. I started getting emails and messages from readers, hundreds of them, then thousands, sharing their own stories and thanking me for giving them hope and practical guidance when they needed it most. The book's success opened doors I hadn't even known existed. I got invited to give keynote speeches at major conferences, not just about marketing strategy, but about resilience and reinvention and building a business around your expertise. I got approached about doing a podcast, which I initially resisted but eventually launched with Alicia's encouragement, interviewing other entrepreneurs and executives who had navigated major career transitions. The podcast became surprisingly popular, regularly hitting the top 50 in the business category, which created its own flywheel of visibility and opportunity. Media outlets started reaching out for commentary on workforce trends and the future of work. LinkedIn featured me as an example of successful career reinvention. The compound effect of the Forbes article, the book, the speaking, and the podcast was that I became somewhat well known in certain business circles, recognized not just as the guy who ran Crawford Strategy Group, but as a thought leader on career resilience and professional reinvention. That recognition was strange to navigate at first. I had never sought to be a public figure, had built the business and written the book for practical reasons rather than fame. But I learned to embrace the platform as an opportunity to help more people at scale than I could ever reach through consulting alone. The visibility also changed the nature of the consulting business in interesting ways. We started getting inbound inquiries from much larger companies, Fortune 500 organizations, that wanted the same strategic approach we brought to mid-market clients, but at enterprise scale. That required evolving our service delivery model, hiring more senior talent, developing more sophisticated project management capabilities. We also started getting approached by consulting firms much larger than us about potential partnerships or acquisitions, now at valuations that made the original $8.5 million offer look quaint. The most recent expression of interest had suggested the business might be worth $25 to $30 million, based on revenue growth and brand strength. I wasn't interested in selling, but it was validating to see the tangible value that had been created through years of hard work and smart positioning. More importantly, the growth created opportunities for my team. People who had joined Crawford Strategy Group when it was small were now senior leaders managing major accounts and practice areas, earning excellent compensation and building their own careers in ways that wouldn't have been possible at a traditional consulting firm where advancement was slower and more political. Creating those opportunities for others felt like its own form of success, maybe even more meaningful than the personal wealth I had accumulated. But perhaps the most unexpected impact of the book and the broader public profile was how it shifted my relationship with my own story. For years after the divorce, I had carried the layoff and Jessica's abandonment as wounds that motivated me through anger and spite and the desperate need to prove I wasn't the failure she had implied I was. Writing the book and sharing the story publicly forced me to fully process and release that wounded narrative, to see the entire journey, including the painful parts, as necessary rather than victimizing. The layoff hadn't been a tragedy. It had been a liberation from a career path that was never going to lead where I actually wanted to go. The divorce hadn't been abandonment. It had been Jessica honestly acknowledging that we wanted incompatible things and doing us both a favor by ending it rather than prolonging the dysfunction. The rock-bottom period hadn't been failure. It had been the necessary destruction of an old identity that was too small to contain what I was capable of becoming. Reframing the story that way, over and over through writing and speaking and podcast interviews, transformed it from a wound into wisdom. I stopped being the guy who got laid off and divorced and became the guy who used crisis as a catalyst for extraordinary growth. That shift in narrative identity was powerful in ways that went beyond business success or financial wealth. It was a fundamental rewriting of how I saw myself and my place in the world. It was during a book signing event at a large business conference in Chicago, almost 7 years after the layoff that had started this entire journey, that I had an encounter that brought everything full circle in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was sitting at a table in the conference expo hall, signing copies of Rebuilt for a steady stream of attendees who wanted to share brief stories about their own career challenges or get advice on making transitions. The conversations were usually quick. A handshake, a 30-second story, a signature, a selfie, move to the next person. But then a woman approached the table who looked vaguely familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place, her expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Hi, Daniel," she said quietly. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Rachel Chen. I used to work with Jessica at the firm. We met a few times at firm events when you two were married." The recognition clicked into place. Yes, I remembered her. One of Jessica's colleagues who had always been friendly but distant in that way. Associates are around partners' spouses. "Of course, hi, Rachel," I said. genuinely surprised to see someone from that old life. "How are you? Are you still at the firm?" She shook her head, sitting down in the chair across from the signing table that was usually reserved for quick conversations. "I left about 6 months ago, actually. Started my own immigration law practice. It's small but growing, and honestly the best decision I've made professionally. Your book was part of what gave me courage to make the leap, which is why I wanted to come talk to you." I felt a warm glow of satisfaction at that. This was exactly why I had written the book, to help people find the courage to bet on themselves. "That's amazing," I said sincerely. "How's it going so far?" She smiled, some of the nervousness fading. "It's terrifying and exhilarating, just like you described in the book. I'm making about half what I made at the firm right now, but I'm building something that's mine, and I actually enjoy the work again instead of just enduring it. So thank you for that." We talked for a few more minutes about the challenges of starting a practice and building a client base, and I shared a few tactical insights that seemed to genuinely help her. Then, as she was preparing to leave, she hesitated and said something that shifted the entire tone of the conversation. "I hope this isn't out of line, but I thought you should know. Jessica's been having a really rough time lately." The statement hung in the air, and I felt conflicting emotions surge through me. Curiosity, definitely, and maybe a small unworthy flash of schadenfreude, but also genuine concern for someone I had once loved, despite everything that had happened. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Rachel seemed to choose her words deliberately, like she was trying to be fair to everyone involved. "She made partner like she wanted, but the pressure at that level is enormous, and she's been struggling with it. The firm has been losing major clients, there's internal politics about who gets what work, and she's been caught in the middle of some of it. I heard through the grapevine that her billable hours have been down, which at partner level is basically a death sentence, because you're supposed to be bringing in business, not just working on it. Plus, her personal life has been kind of a disaster. She was engaged to another lawyer, but that fell apart last year. She's been lonely, I think, and she's been dealing with some health issues that the stress has made worse. Nothing life-threatening, but chronic and painful." Rachel paused, looking at me carefully. "I know you two didn't end well, and I'm not asking you to do anything about it. I just thought you should know, especially since she's been following your success, and I think it's been hard for her to watch you thriving while she's struggling." The information landed with complex weight. The petty part of me that still carried scars from how she had abandoned me felt a mean satisfaction that her calculated choice to leave had not resulted in the perpetual upward trajectory she had envisioned. But the larger part of me, the part that had done years of growth work and healing, just felt sad for her. Sad that she had optimized her life for a version of success that was making her miserable. Sad that she was struggling with health issues. Sad that the ruthless prioritization of career above all else had apparently left her isolated and unfulfilled. "I appreciate you telling me," I said to Rachel. "I don't wish her any harm, and I hope she figures out how to find balance and health and happiness. But I also don't think there's anything I can or should do about her situation. We're different people now, living completely separate lives, and that's how it needs to stay." Rachel nodded, seeming to understand. "I wasn't expecting you to ride in and save her or anything. I think I just wanted you to know that the grass wasn't as green as she thought it would be on the other side. Sometimes the choices that seem smart and strategic in the moment turn out to be wrong in the long run." She stood up, gave me a genuine smile, and said, "Anyway, congratulations on everything you've built. The book is really excellent, and watching your journey has been inspiring even from a distance. Keep doing what you're doing." After Rachel left, I sat at that signing table for the remaining hour of the scheduled time, but my mind kept returning to what she had told me about Jessica. There was a version of this story where I would have felt vindicated, where her struggles would have felt like cosmic justice for how she had treated me. And I won't lie, there was a small part of me that felt that. But the dominant emotion was something more like compassion mixed with relief. Compassion, because I genuinely didn't want her to suffer, even though she had caused me tremendous pain. Relief because her struggles confirmed something I had come to believe, but hadn't fully tested, that the kind of success she had been chasing, prestige, money, status, the validation of achieving what society says you're supposed to want, was fundamentally empty if it wasn't aligned with who you actually were and what you actually valued, She had gotten exactly what she said she wanted, and it had made her miserable. Meanwhile, I had lost everything and rebuilt according to values I actually believed in, and I was genuinely happy, genuinely fulfilled, genuinely at peace. The contrast wasn't just about professional success or financial outcomes. It was about the difference between external validation and internal alignment, between achieving goals and living according to principles, between winning a game and playing one that actually mattered to you. That night, lying in bed in my hotel room, I found myself thinking about the entire arc of the journey from that devastating layoff to this moment. 7 years. In that time, I had gone from absolute rock bottom, unemployed, divorced, broke, living in a studio apartment, eating ramen, and wondering if I would ever be okay again, to running a multi-million-dollar business, speaking on stages, writing best-selling books, building a healthy relationship with someone who actually loved me for who I was, rather than what I could do for her image. But the external markers of success, as satisfying as they were, weren't actually the victory. The real victory was internal. I had transformed from someone who derived all his identity and worth from external validation into someone who knew his own value, independent of circumstances or other people's opinions. I had learned to trust myself, to bet on myself, to build according to my own values rather than trying to meet someone else's standards. I had discovered resilience I didn't know I possessed, and capabilities I had never tested because I had always played it safe. The layoff and divorce, as devastating as they had been in the moment, had been the best things that ever happened to me because they had destroyed a comfortable but limited life and forced me to build something truer and bigger. Jessica's reappearance and Rachel's update had just confirmed what I already knew but sometimes needed reminding of. I had chosen the right path, built the right life, become the right version of myself. The years that followed brought continued growth but also a deepening sense of purpose that transcended just building a successful business. Crawford's strategy group crossed $15 million in annual revenue, expanded to 5 offices across the Southeast, and earned recognition as one of the fastest-growing private companies in the region. But more meaningful than the metrics was what we had built culturally. A company where talented people could do their best work, where clients got genuine value rather than generic advice, where success was measured by impact rather than just billables. I had learned through my own painful journey that work could be either a soul-crushing obligation or a meaningful expression of capability and values, and I was determined to create the latter for everyone who chose to work with us. We implemented unlimited PTO because I trusted my team to manage their own time, profit sharing because the people who created the value deserved to share in it, and transparent career paths because I remembered how frustrating it was to work hard without knowing if it would lead anywhere. The culture attracted exceptional talent who could have worked anywhere but chose Crawford Strategy Group because they wanted to work somewhere that treated them like adults and valued their contribution beyond just what they produced. Alicia and I got married in a small ceremony with close friends and family. No big production or expensive venue, just a genuine celebration of partnership between 2 people who had found each other after doing the work to become whole individuals first. The wedding was so different from my first marriage. No stress about impressing people or performing the right image, just authentic joy and the clear-eyed commitment of 2 people who knew exactly what they were signing up for. We bought a house together, a beautiful modern place with space for both of us to work and live comfortably, and it felt nothing like the house Jessica and I had bought in our attempt to look successful. This house was chosen because we loved it, not because we needed to prove anything. Our life together was characterized by the same healthy independence that had defined our relationship from the start, supporting each other's careers without competing, making decisions together without keeping score, building a partnership that enhanced rather than constrained our individual identities. It was exactly what I had needed, but hadn't known to ask for during my first marriage, when I had been too focused on meeting external expectations to understand what actually made me happy. The book continued to reach people in ways that generated meaning beyond the financial success. I received messages regularly from readers who had used the frameworks to navigate their own career transitions, who had started their own consulting practices or businesses, who had found the courage to leave situations that weren't serving them. Each message was a reminder that sharing my story had been worthwhile despite the vulnerability it required, that my painful experience could be transformed into something that helped others avoid similar pain or at least navigate it with more tools and hope. I started a mentorship program through Crawford's Strategy Group, offering free advisory to people who were in the early stages of building consulting practices and didn't have the resources to hire expensive help. We mentored about 30 people per year, many of whom went on to build successful practices of their own, and watching them succeed felt like extending the impact of my own journey in ways that pure business growth never could. Some of my best friendships had come from those mentoring relationships, connections with people who understood the challenges and the rewards of betting on yourself in a world that often encourages playing it safe. Looking back now from the vantage point of sustained success and genuine happiness, I can see the entire journey with clarity that wasn't available during the painful middle years. The layoff that felt like the end of my world had actually been the beginning of my real life. The destruction of a comfortable but limiting identity that was never going to lead where I actually wanted to go. Jessica leaving me, as cruel as it felt at the time, had been a necessary severing of a relationship that was built on conditional love and incompatible values. She needed to be free to pursue her version of success, and I needed to be free to discover mine. The rock-bottom period of eating ramen in a studio apartment and wondering if I would ever be okay again had been the forge where resilience and self-reliance and genuine confidence were built through fire and pressure. Every part of the journey that felt like failure in the moment had actually been essential preparation for the success that came later, teaching me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way, and forcing me to develop capabilities I would have never discovered if life had been easier. The pain had been real and substantial, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but the transformation it enabled had been invaluable in ways that made it all worthwhile in retrospect. The truth I had learned through living it was this: you don't rise to the level of your circumstances. You fall to the level of your systems, your mindset, your willingness to keep moving forward when everything feels hopeless. And once you learn that lesson in your bones, once you prove to yourself that you can come back from devastation stronger than before, nothing can ever truly break you again. I never heard from Jessica again after that coffee shop meeting where she had asked about reconciliation, and I had declined. Through mutual connections, I learned that she eventually left the law firm, burned out, and disillusioned with the partner track she had sacrificed so much to achieve. Last I heard, she was working as in-house counsel at a mid-sized company. Normal hours and less prestige, but apparently happier with the balance. I genuinely hoped she had found her own version of peace and fulfillment, whatever that looked like for her. Our paths had diverged completely and would likely never cross again, which felt appropriate. We were characters in each other's origin stories, catalysts for growth, but not people who belonged in each other's present or future. The Forbes cover that had sparked her reappearance now hung framed in my office, not as a trophy of revenge, but as a reminder of how far the journey had taken me and how much had changed. Next to it, I had framed the termination letter from my layoff, a deliberate juxtaposition that told the complete story, from this to that, from devastation to triumph, from dependent employee to independent builder. Every person who came into my office saw those two frames and understood without explanation the transformation they represented. And when they asked about the journey between them, I told them the truth. Success isn't about proving other people wrong about you. It's about proving yourself right. It's about having a vision of who you can become and refusing to let anyone else's limitations become your ceiling. It's about turning crisis into catalyst and devastation into determination. That's the lesson. That's the victory. That's the life I built from the ashes of the one that burned down, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.